He's literally saying we would offer them protective cover and then demand they at least get their shit straight by at least bringing up one Hamas militant, or just someone that they lied was a Hamas militant or some shit. Okay? So that we could just say, you see, those children had to die. Now, we're also going to talk about another thing that just came out. Isaac Chotiner, as you guys know, from The New Yorker, is famous for these scathing Q&As that he does. And the reason why it's considered incredible is because he does something that many journalists don't, which is basic follow-up questions. Unfortunately, basic journalism, which requires follow-up questions when the person you're interviewing says something unhinged, happens far too little nowadays, and that's precisely the reason why Isaac Chotiner is seen as like this incredible journalist, which, he does do great journalism if we're being real, okay? Yeah, the famous Isaac Chotiner follow-up is, what did you just say? Can you please elaborate on the Hitlerian thing that you just said? That's usually what he does, and these guys, for some reason, will elaborate. And yes, they are like, no, you're right, it was Hitlerian, and I stand by it. So he has interviewed a bunch of people. He's interviewed a bunch of people who are obviously pro-Israel. He's interviewed like settlers in the West Bank who are heinous monsters. He's interviewed Deborah Lipstadt, I think I'm saying her name wrong potentially, which was the anti-Semitism czar for Joe Biden. And now Isaac Chotiner has interviewed Jacob Lew, the former president's support for Israel abetted a humanitarian catastrophe. But Jacob Lew, who served as a U.S. ambassador to the country, still thinks that the Trump White House could learn from its predecessor. Okay? Chris Kunzler talking about the leaked Epstein. No, don't worry. We got that too. We got a whopper, okay, from Matthew Petty over at Reason on the ties that Jeffrey Epstein had to a foreign espionage tool. And that is not China, nor is it Hamas, nor is it Iran, nor is it Russia. Guys, you might be shocked, but it's actually Israel. Anyway, but we're going to get there in a second. I'm just going to give you some choice quotes from this, okay? Jacob Lew, Israel's ambassador to the U.S. under Joe Biden, was interviewed by Isaac Chotiner. Isaac says, if the goal was to get in aid, some people would say that keeping the current government afloat was a bad idea. Another possibility would have been to seriously threaten to stop arming them. How do you respond to that? Look, I think President Biden was clear immediately after October 7th that he would support Israel in achieving the military objective of defeating Hamas. There was always a debate about what that meant, and we engaged diplomatically on difference between defeating Hamas as a military and governing authority and eliminating the last Hamas fighter, which we didn't believe at the beginning, and I don't believe today is possible. But our goal, yeah, here it is. Yeah, I got it. Don't worry. I'm going to cover it in a second. I'm going to cover it later. Okay, hold on. Where was it? Oh, here. Okay. That was not something that we use as a general matter to say, if you don't do other things we want, we'll stop defending you. Part of it was that President Biden was so clear in his position that it wouldn't have even been credible. Well, Biden still had the power to do it. I'm not saying he was going to, but he could have, right? Right. But when he was vice president, Joe Biden was famous for saying great powers can't bluff. It was something that is deep inside him. He did bluff, though, over and over again. Every red line was a bluff. His commitment to supporting Israel is in a legitimate, just fight was clear and had to coexist with pressing them on those humanitarian issues. This is a war that former defense minister Netanyahu has referred to as whether you agree with this characterization or not, there is a certain point at which the U.S. could choose to stop helping Israel. Your answer is almost tautological, right? Biden wasn't going to do this, so he couldn't do this. Isaac, I think you have to put things in the perspective of the time frame. We're talking about late 2023, early 2024, up until 2025. We engaged with Israel on military tactics in a very direct way. No, they didn't. Take the decision to proceed in Rafah in May 2024. More than 1 million Palestinians, many of whom had congregated in Rafah in the first month of the war, fled to the city during the offensive. He writes in brackets. The Israeli military plan that was originally designed and the one that was executed were very different. If you look at the way they fought in Rafah, the reason we didn't criticize it is that they took the advice that we had given them and they modified their military plans to be consistent with targeted intelligence-driven attacks. Rafah is completely reduced to rubble, and it was entirely, the red line that Biden presented was no arms in Rafah, no tanks in Rafah. It was violated shortly after he even made that statement. And what did Biden do? Nothing. Nothing. Also, this advocacy, when is demonstrable, it's in broad daylight, only further implicates America directly in these, for the record. Okay? So we were engaging not just on humanitarian assistance, we were engaging on the conduct of the war. I'm not saying that everything went the way we would have advised, and I'm not saying we didn't call them in the middle of the night many times saying, what on earth happened just now? What on earth happened just now? But here, the big part is coming right now. When you would call them in the middle of the night and say, what on earth happened? What was usually the answer? Isaac asks. Also, remember, not only is Jacob Lew admitting to perpetrating and perpetuating it and you know, giving the arms to do so, he's also presenting this in the dumbest way possible, where he's like, Israel just kept duping us. It's so silly. Doy, we said every time. Like, you're not Speedrunner, okay? You're not the Coyote. You're not Wile E. Coyote. And Israel is just like consistently drawing tunnels on the side of a mountain. What the is this? Or Speedrunner, Roadrunner, whatever. I effed it up. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. If I can see it from where I'm standing, and I'm a goddamn Twitch streamer, you can see it there. You have a lot more intelligence than I do. My mother-in-law says she doesn't like how shouty you are and that you remind her of Rush Limbaugh. I couldn't figure out what to say in response. Tell her I am just like Rush Limbaugh, except I don't have brainworms, both literally and figuratively. Get it? Because he's dead, and also he died of brain cancer, and also had brainworms, like figuratively, as in he was an insane right-winger. Also deep holes in his brain because he just did a ton of drugs. Rest in piss. He's looking up at us right now going, I'm burning. Why are there no oxys down here? That's what he's saying. Okay. The general pattern, Jacob Lew responds, was that in the moment, stories were inaccurate and that the Israeli military and government establishment were not in a position to fully explain it yet. We could almost never get answers that explained what happened before the story was fully framed in international media. And then, when the facts were fully developed, it turned out that the casualties were much lower, the number of civilians was much lower, and in many cases, the children were children of Hamas fighters, not children taking cover in places. To which Isaac responds with, sorry, what did you just say? To which Jacob Lew responds with, in many cases, the original number of casualties, he cuts him off and he says, no, I meant the thing about who the children were. They were often the children of the fighters themselves. And therefore, what follows from that, he responds with, what follows is that whether or not a target flows from the population that's there. Hold on, Mr. Secretary. That's not, in fact, correct, right? Whether it's a legitimate target has to do with all kinds of things like proportionality. It doesn't matter if the kids are the kids of. He stops him. Jacob Lew stops Isaac from even further elaborating on his question to say, if you're in a command and control center, that's different than if it's a school that's emptied out and innocent civilians are taking shelter there. If you're the commander of a Hamas unit and you bring your family to a military site, that's different. I'm not saying everything fits into that, and I'm not saying it's not a tragedy. To which Isaac responds with, it may shine a very poor light on Hamas, but who the kids are does not make a difference in terms of international law. To which he responds with, yeah, he's not saying it's not a tragedy. He's just saying he supports the tragedy. Exactly. For the record, this is literally just Nazi speak. I just need you to understand. Like, this is what happens when you're a Nazi, okay, and you just don't think you will ever be held accountable for being a Nazi, so you're just open about it, you know? Like, this is it. This is you being like, I'm a Nazi, and this is good. Children of enemy combatants is A-okay. It's a tragedy, but I like it, okay? You call it a tragedy, I call it awesome. And anyway, and this is not the first time he said this, okay? It is not the simple question that it originally appears to be when the initial report makes it sound like the target was just an empty school that families took cover in. In some cases, I'm not aware of the full explanations because when I left, we were still asking questions to get more detail and saying to them that they have to be able to explain these things. He's literally saying we would offer them protective cover and then demand they at least get their shit straight by at least bringing up one Hamas militant or just someone that they lied was a Hamas militant or some shit. Okay, so that we could just say, you see, those children had to die. I'm not going to say that none of them fall outside of the bounds of things when there should be disciplinary action against some of the officers involved. I don't know the answer to that. Of course, once again, it's okay to children if their parents are your enemies is a precedent set by the Obama administration when Lou was Obama's chief of staff. Robert Gibbs says, Anwar al-Awlaki's son by drone strike needs far more responsible father. Okay? And also, if you want to see his quote, he said the exact same shit in the Times of Israel all the way back in January. People tend to focus the day something happens. The media that is presenting a pro-Hamas perspective is out instantaneously telling a story. It tells a story that is, over time, shown not to be completely accurate. It is verbatim the same quote he gave the Times of Israel. 35 children were, well, it wasn't 35 children. It was many fewer. The children who were turned out to have been the children of Hamas fighters. Not in every case, but we try to keep that information flowing. But the press moves on. The world moves on. And in policy circles, you can keep people focused saying it's bad, but it wasn't quite what it sounded like. In the world's eye, the first story out there is the one that creates an impression. That's him saying the same shit in January. 2 Times of Israel with a little tweaks because it's Times of Israel. So he said the media is presenting a pro-Hamas perspective. He didn't say that to Isaac Chotiner a couple months later because it's American media. And if he were to sound like a psychopathic Israeli person, then, you know, people would probably respond a little bit negatively to that. So he just like tweaked it a little bit, you know? Nice. Anyway, the investigations editor of The Prospect also in the aftermath of this interview came out and got a quote from the State Department. State Department folks told me Lou was way, way more genocidal and influential than Blinken. Naturally, he also ran the Treasury Department under Obama. And of course, once again, those targeting standards are obviously not equivalent. You only can get away with making it seem as though that is a reliable targeting standard when you know that your enemies, non-state actors, have no capability of retaliating in kind. Okay? That's why, for example, Israeli journalists who are IDF veterans and embed themselves with the IDF can get away with saying, oh, the journalists that were Hamas and their families were also Hamas. Meanwhile, those very same standards, if applied in retaliation to Israel, would justify nuking Tel Aviv. Obviously, I'm not advocating for that. I'm simply stating how insane Israel's targeting standards are. Okay? In many circumstances, those people that they're pointing to are not even Hamas, but it doesn't matter. Just like his targeting standards of proportionality are so out of whack that if the position of the United States was evenly applied to the enemies of the United States, famously a nation that ships families around the world to accompany soldiers, that families on military bases are legitimate targets while the military combatants are sleeping. And it's not just military members either. It's also politicians as well. Okay, politicians and their family members. It's academics and their family members. It's just straight up journalists and their family members. You can anyone and everyone on the planet, because the goals of Israel is not to conduct a war with the standards that were designed for war. I know all war is a crime. I'm not talking about that right now. The goal of Israel is something different. And that's precisely the reason why all of this posturing, all of this like proportionality arguments and whatnot fall by the wayside when you look at the actual targeting. When you look at who they're, okay, it's ridiculous. It's objectively ridiculous. We'll get to Cracker Barrel later because there's a lot to cover here, okay? Because we got the Epstein shit too. Where Israel and the U.S. stance on an excuse on fighting Hamas comes from, by the way, directly from Israel. Eliminating Hamas. Insights from Sri Lanka's defeat of the Tamil Tigers. Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I know Arun is going to get very excited for me to point to this, but this is literally directly coming from an extermination campaign that already took place under similar circumstances without even the Western world actually What? Hey, you'll get banned for saying that word again? What word? It's 1-to-1 for all the details that I have seen of it, at least. Okay, moving on and continuing with the incidents that took place